I'm Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector Podcast, and we're on location at the Critical Metals Conference in Kelowna, British Columbia. And I am sitting across from John Desjarlais, who is the Executive Director of the Indigenous Resource Network. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Michael. I'm pleased. I'm honored to be on your podcast.
I'm very pleased to have you. We've started working with the Indigenous Resource Network in part and parcel with our Aboriginal mining section, and I'm looking forward to a long relationship with your organization. For those that aren't familiar with the organization, explain to everybody kind of who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So the Indigenous Resource Network is it's a relatively new organization, not brand new, but we're about 5 years old, and we a collection of Indigenous people working in the resource industry stood the resource network up. I think rallied around, there wasn't enough positivity and there wasn't enough kind of practicality in Indigenous representation and discourse in media, and so we saw that sensationalization. We saw, what the public saw, which was blockades and issues and everything. And so we wanted to just have a different approach, and we wanted to share a lot of the good stories, standardize, I think, a lot of the best practices, wise practices in terms of engagement, inclusion, retention, procurement. So we built it off that. We built it and then launched it off a poll, which affirmed what we believe. It's the 2/3 of Indigenous people do support resource development, and it didn't say 1/3 was against. It said that there was room to kind of improve the relationship there. And so since then, the network has grown, reaching up to pushing 2,000 members of Indigenous people working within the sector, and continues to grow. We have over 14,000 subscribers to our newsletter, tens of thousands of followers across our social media platform, and we're engaged right across Canada, with board representation, with staff, and we're just trying to get out there and then be useful, have a positive voice that reflects, I think, some more meaningful discourse and bringing that relationship, closer in terms of industry, government, and Indigenous people.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. It's the challenge always is that there always seems to be somebody speaking for First Nations that is not actually an Indigenous individual, and it makes it very hard to sort it out. You yourself, you're Métis Cree, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so I'm Cree Métis, Nenau, Treaty 5, Cumberland House, Covenants Managuskak. It's a community that is, where, Métis Cree, Métis First Nation, it's really, there's one type of Indigenous person in the community. I think every single one of my nieces and nephews is First Nation. My brother and sister, First Nation, and it's kind of that process. And so that's why, I've seen, the importance of, we kind of have those shared experiences in terms of socioeconomics. So advocating, I think, for all from that good values perspective, don't pretend I speak for elected leaders, and certainly just how do I use my experience from that values oriented approach to support and bolster, I think, a lot of the work that's already being done. And, and then again, just to coordinate and support our Indigenous leaders that are doing some amazing work. And how do we do that? Yeah. And so IRN reflects that. We're not necessarily, the voice. We're not necessarily, we just try to elevate those that are already speaking, those communities that are self-determining, participating, those leaders that are doing it, give them a platform to be able to do that, and humbly honored to be able to kind of reiterate and share a lot of the stories that we hear right across Canada.
Yeah, and there are a lot of positive stories across Canada, but it is unfortunate when you see the media generally portrays the negative stories, and at the end of the day, that's what people see, and they think that we're in a situation where the First Nations don't want resources development, and therefore any project in Canada can't proceed. And you and I both know that that's not correct, and it's good to have a positive voice that is that's speaking truth to, what's the negative publicity that's out there.
Yeah.
We are at a critical metals conference. We have had a couple of days of lots of discussions about how we need the minerals. Canada has them in abundance. You gave a wonderful presentation this morning, and one of the statements that you made in your presentation just leaped out at me. And that was that every single critical minerals project in Canada is either on Indigenous land or nearby Indigenous land. And therefore, the Indigenous peoples of Canada need to be partners in this to solve this problem as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like any development of any meaningful strategy, I think reflects that reality. And, summarizing some of the key points, like, if there's going to be that impact. And so every project proposed, every resource I think identified, it does impact some territory, thus impact rights in some way. And instead of avoiding or managing and mitigating that, we need to lean into that and realize the value of that partnership and that relationship. And so this is where engage early. We need to get in front, and then proponents, need to kind of align with those communities and community interests, and then figure out what works for those communities in the spirit of true partnership, in the spirit of reconciliation, and in the spirit, not necessarily the spirit, but actually affording those rights. The not just the dignity, but I mean what they truly deserve, right? And then that is recognizing constitutionally protected and their ability to use the land in perpetuity, but engaging in that good faith way, and then talking about development together, talking about addressing kind of challenges together, talking about all sorts of opportunities to participate through equity, through meaningful inclusion, through procurement, through business development, but just understanding what the the needs and hopes are for the community. And we hear developers say it more often now, and leave those communities better off than when we got there. And so it's an absolute important time right now to recognize that we need to seek partnerships. We need to seek shareholders, not stakeholders, not, someone just to manage in terms of risk to the potential project, but we need, true partnership. How do we do this together? And that has worked incredibly well, where we've seen it work across some incredible examples in Canada. Relative to, I think the conversation is Indigenous people didn't want to own mines, too risky. Well, now First Nation owns a mine. Selkirk First Nation now owns a mine in northern Canada, and so ownership can happen. And as we understand infrastructure and mine infrastructure, we can kind of break that up, and then there could be ownership, not necessarily of large projects, but what that looks like. And then of course those good agreements, getting to that consent and sustaining it so that it's resilient. There's huge opportunity there to do it well, and it's not novel. It's being done across Canada, and there's great examples, and we just need to make sure that that kind of level set. That's the expectation now, and that's how we're going to develop. And it's a competitive advantage. We lean into that. We'll develop quicker. We'll move through timelines faster. We'll inspire greater investor confidence. We'll see greater economic participation of Canada and its resources, its value chains. There'll just be an amazing cascading effect.
Yeah, no, and it's very interesting. You talk about true partnerships. I'm starting to see now where not only is industry going to governments saying, how can we move this forward, but they're going in partnership with the First Nations community saying, look, we all want to benefit from this together. How do we make this happen? And it seems, at least on the surface, and you might see it differently, but it seems to move government along a little bit more quickly, or
Yes.
am I a cockeyed optimist?
No, absolutely. In reality, and so I think we're in a time right now, and then we're trying to move quick. This like where we built a regulatory system that is to mitigate a lot of the challenges we saw in the past, and the jurisprudence, and the recognition of rights, and the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge, and all those are incredibly important. But there's still a little bit of aversion in terms of moving through that and moving through it, efficiently without compromising on the integrity of that process. And so now when we're having as opposed to industry going to government and trying to understand this process and to navigate it, and then going to community, they're leapfrogging, where they're going to communities, setting up a great relationship, and building kind of agreements on that are relational and consent based to sustain it, and then going with their community partner to government to inspire that confidence and to move that process along. And we've seen projects developed, in particular in BC, where there's been, where Indigenous communities were in fact actually proponents, and where they are co-regulating, or where they're involved in the way that is meaningful to them. And so then they go and they go with industry and say, okay, we need to move this. We've satisfied everything. And then there's no need to be, kind of averse in terms of that risk. There's no need to be averse in terms of that regulatory process. And then there's an interest to kind of move it through, to serve and then to get these projects done, built. So it's actually, it's realism. It's actually happening. There's cases where community are lockstep with industry. There's a partnership there, and they're helping to kind of inspire the confidence to move these projects through more efficiently. Of course, without compromising on kind of the intent and the integrity of ensuring that rights and environment and the protections are there. But there's just, I think, more confidence that we can move through that process quicker.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I see from an engagement standpoint, there's a huge difference in that. You've got engagement that is equal. You've got two parties speaking in partnership, whereas engagement was perceived incorrectly, probably by industry, that it was a ticking of the box. We met with the chief and council. We told them what we're going to do. We consulted. And that's not the type of engagement we need. We need partnership engagement. And that's where people, figure out each other's needs and what they want to get out of the partnership, and they work towards that. It's kind of almost like a happy marriage in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it does is, you're right, it's flipped kind of our understanding of engagement and duty to consult. In terms of engagement is much bigger than consultation. And it's about relationship. And it can't be procedural, it can't be transactional. Engagement is about relationship and building a trusting relationship, and consultation kind of is managed through that. It's managed through a relationship, and there's greater success when, of course, there's trust, there's social license, there's transparency, and the understanding of impacts to rights and mitigating that. And so things have changed a lot. I think we see these things being less procedural, less about ticking boxes. I've heard, in my experience involved in consultation over 10 years ago, that this cannot be a box checking exercise. It cannot be a steam blowing exercise. It cannot be, it cannot be those things, because the nations, they'll know, they'll sense, and they'll get frustrated, and they will disengage in this process. And truly, is that meeting the spirit and intent of consultation? Is that epic? Is that any of those things? No. When decisions are already made, it absolutely isn't. And so, now again, let's build a relationship. Let's build a partnership with these communities, and let's work to make sure we sustain and manage that. Like you said, like a marriage, it takes work, and there's a lot of work. And the intent is, again, it's not transactional. It's just a kind of fulfillment in the relationship together. And so, things are changing. And at the RN, we want to lean into all that.
And like most relationships, they, as you say, they take work. So engagement doesn't always end at the first thing. You have to work through it. Absolutely. And it continues on. So engagement is an ongoing process. And just because you've solved these problems over here doesn't mean that you've solved those problems over there. And you still need to work together to make sure that everything is right with the world, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Now, industry itself, if they engage properly, there is an abundance of opportunity for not only for the industry, but for the Indigenous communities themselves. A lot of them are creating support businesses, drilling companies, geotechnical companies, housing companies, catering companies, a lot of opportunities for a workforce. We work in an industry where there's a massive labor shortage. If we were to snap our fingers and permit all the mines that we needed tomorrow, we don't have the workforce to do that. Yet in Indigenous communities, youth unemployment is some of the highest in the country. So there's opportunities now for those youth in those communities not only to have meaningful employment, jobs that pay above average, but they can do this without having to leave their communities to go do that. This sounds like massive amounts of win for all sides.
It's wins absolutely all around. And so workforce development, business development, like even just from a business perspective, not having to fly in talent, and having it local and developing your businesses and diversifying your supply chains. There's all sorts of business merits and reasons for doing that. And you're right, engagement. What we're seeing is in good engagement and getting in front and forecasting opportunities, communities can organize around their community development and business development plans, and then thus start developing sustainable businesses on those and responding kind of to some of those, those projections and opportunities and build a sustainable business so that they can take those businesses and expand into other markets, other regions and things like that. And we're seeing, that's economic development where there's an understanding of kind of the people side as well as the business growth side and building capacity. And economic development is about, what type of sustainable, people developing capacity, people developing opportunities do we have in terms of just, or in concert with just with business diversifying and business development opportunities. Those things happen. But the biggest thing, there's a couple pieces. And so, we certainly need to do more work showing that, Indigenous youth, the resource economy, absolutely is aligned with our values. And it's the greatest places to live our values in terms of stewardship, sustainability, mining and energy and oil and gas. You want to influence climate change and transformation and innovation and footprint. The best place to do those are in those industries. You want to support, an energy transition and transformation. The best place to do that is in terms of innovation, and then of course the resource extraction side and the mining side, and fastest growing demographic, Indigenous youth. It largely the unemployment opportunities, especially in those local remote, are limited to public, and so when you have opportunities like that, it's an opportunity to make generational change where you develop like real capacity where those people can establish livelihoods, great careers, and then of course they're the workforce that serve serve that development opportunities. And so there's nothing but wins all around, to figure out that relationship early, develop that workforce development plans that are inclusive of those communities and their socioeconomic needs, the business development needs to diversify that side. There's just nothing but wins all around. But that requires us looking, past our own bias, our own prejudice, and going into those communities and say, let's do business a little differently, and it'll still be, if it'll actually be more profitable and more sustainable, and it'll support the relationship we're trying to develop. And so, nothing but opportunity all around. It's about coming closer together and realizing that.
Yeah, I like what you said about generational as well. You and I both attended a conference in Toronto at the end of April. It was put on by the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. I think I got
you did.
the name right. It's
FNMPP,
it's an awful lot of consonants to get that one out. But one of the things that struck me at that conference, and I had heard it before, but it was a common theme and thread throughout. They talk about the 7 generational opportunity. Can you explain exactly what that is and why that's meaningful?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And we talk about it often. And actually, it's the theme in our recent documentary with Westbank First Nation, which very relevant right here in Kelowna. And so 7 generations thinking, it's all about sustainability, and it's a way to kind of understand sustainability. It's a way to put kind of almost a time frame on it, and so Indigenous teaching, 7 generations, teachings, philosophy, sustainability is what decisions are we making today so that we can ensure that 7 generations from now, those people can be living in a way that is just as prosperous as we are living today. So when we think about development, when we think about environmental impact, what decisions are we making today so that we don't impact the ability for 7 generations to live, in that way, in that prosperous way? When we think economic, when we think people, when we think development and social development, what decisions can we make so that we are impacting for the better 7 generations out? And so then that type of thinking, it really influences a lot of aspects. It influences, a business development aspect. It's like, okay, let's not chase kind of and make decisions for short-term gains. How do we build livelihood, long-term community wealth? How do we look kind of past, some of those short-term cycles and then into more of a longer term? And so, it's not talking about hundreds of years strategic planning, but it's just like, how do we kind of not prioritize the now, and then think about this from a perspective so that our children and their children can benefit from the decisions we're making today. And that's starting to come through in so many different places, and wonderful organizations like FNMPC give prominence to the discussion and then talk about it, and it shows up in a lot of the different presentations there. But yeah, it's an important way to look at development, to look at sustainability, to look at the value system and where Indigenous people are coming from. And so it puts kind of it puts a way that I think people can kind of identify and relate with that time frame, that perspective, and hopefully we embed it in more practice, right across all sectors.
So let's go through the exercise. You were on a panel with me yesterday.
Yeah.
We gave you, I don't know, you said it was a demotion. I thought it was a promotion. We made you prime minister. But it was timely. We have a new government in Canada. He's been around for a couple of months.
Yeah.
He's talking a lot.
Yeah.
Not necessarily doing a lot yet, but he's talking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The question is now, given everything we've just talked about, the seven generations, youth unemployment, the fact that critical metals development is going to go through Indigenous lands, etc. If you were prime minister, how do you put all that together? What would you be doing to make sure that this is a reality for the best, the best for industry, the best for Canada, and the best for the Indigenous communities?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, to clarify, I guess, not to clarify, to correct myself, it would be an incredible honor, to be in that position and to serve all of Canadians. Some of the greatest positions I've got to hold. I got to be Indigenous and serve, all people, non-Indigenous and Indigenous, from that values perspective, and brought value as an Indigenous person. And so, no, it'd be an incredible honor. I just have to say that. I think I was being a little cheeky yesterday, but no, I think. It's all about integrity, credibility, trust, to mobilize and to move and to kind of take advantage of world forces, to challenge world forces, but to take advantage of world opportunities. We need to start moving on things pretty quickly here. But at the same time, that has to happen in stereo with ensuring, which we're hearing the majority of discussion around today, especially in regards to Bill C-5 and development and projects, is that, we absolutely cannot, we cannot undermine the integrity of what constitutionally protected rights means here in Canada. And, the rights have to be paramount to any development decision, any process, and any discussion. And, that's incredibly important. Take that position and then, of course, assure that and build trust around that. And that's what's happening is there's a lot of communities that are, I think distrusting because, and they've probably earned that position because they haven't been treated very well either by, a local government or industry. I just know a lot of things have changed since. And so certainly as a leader is to organize around those communities and those relationships with industry where they've worked. Organize around those to showcase why some of these things worked, because we're not jumping into a new novel space, and to mobilize on that and to ensure that sustainability is a part of that. We can move through these things, expediently, but at the same time, we won't compromise on on ensuring we're taking advantage of developing a healthy workforce, achieving means of reconciliation, that communities are meaningfully included, where equity is a major conversation at the top of it in terms of either resource development or the supporting infrastructure, and then of course co-governance, co-management to ensure that we're monitoring or that we're addressing what we understand to be the impacts of rights at that time, but that we're committed to ensuring we're monitoring and then thus mitigating, addressing and accommodating for impacts down the road. Doing that at the table together, that's the important piece. And I think we need to inspire trust that Indigenous people, we're at the table now. We're not, off to the side. We always say, and I've always heard, Indigenous people, not necessarily against policy or resource development. We're just against not having our meaningful place at the table. And I want to see our leaders. I want to see our elected leaders at those tables, ensuring that those decisions on rights and inclusion and everything are happening. And so, as a leader, as if I was the prime minister, it would be, yes, I'm going to make sure that happens, and I'm going to respect, the position of people, Indigenous people, and then ensure that there's a healthy public trust and public engagement in terms of that aspect, and really lean into why this is good for all of Canadians and build off that.
Well said. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to having you on future podcasts. This is a long, meaningful two-way dialogue that's going to go on for quite some time. And just like we talk about relationships, they're not one-dimensional, and they happen over time. So awesome. Thank you for the time today.
You bet, Michael. Thank you.
The Prospector News podcast is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and are not to be taken as investment advice. Listeners need to do their own due diligence and seek advice of a licensed investment advisor.